Nolan's got to juggle instruments today. They have a beautiful song for community. He's got to get his big old cello out. So the non-biblical reading for today is from Joyce Rupp's book, Open the Door. The door and a gate, for that matter, have been symbols of the divine in many different religious traditions. So when you hear that imagery, understand it to mean the divine essence, to mean God. The story of the Exodus journey exemplifies the door of divinity as a conduit for spiritual growth. When the Israelites hurried away from enslavement in Egypt, they brought with them an unquenchable thirst for a homeland of their own. The great door never closed to this people, bound together by a desire for liberation. As they passed through the wilderness, these wanderers were nourished, forgiven, challenged, taught, guided, transformed by this faithful presence. This group of people wandering through their unfolding life represents the soul of each person, searching for the promised land of personal authenticity and a vibrant life with God.
And our scripture reading for this morning is from Exodus chapter 15. You led your redeemed people with your unfailing love. With your strength, you guided them to your holy pasture. You brought them and planted them upon your own mountain, that place, O Most High God, that place where you take your seat, that sanctuary you have created with your own hands. Yahweh will reign forever and ever.
Would you pray with me? Holy One, help us to open our hearts and our minds to your Spirit, whatever message you might have for us this morning, in the stories of our lives, in the story of this place. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. So Martin Buber was a great Christian theologian. He once said that a story must be told in such a way that it constitutes help in itself. And he tells a story about his grandfather, who was lame. I'm going to put this down. Otherwise I can't see Brenda's pretty face. So his grandfather was lame, and then one day they asked his grandfather to tell a story about his teacher. And his grandfather starts talking about how when his teacher would pray, his teacher would dance and hop around on one foot. And he got so caught up in telling this story that he rose from his chair and he started dancing and hopping around on one foot. And from that hour, he was healed of his lameness. That, Martin Buber says, is the way to tell a story. Every good story is a story about transformation, isn't it? If you really think about it, whether it's a movie or a book or a story in a sermon or a documentary, it's a story about a change. It's a movement from one place to another in a character. It's usually a character who's, every story has the character has difficulties, has challenges, has emotional struggles, has things that they're trying to overcome. And as you go through the story, you see the character change and learn and grow until they sort of reach a place of epiphany or contentment or, this newfound place of goodness in life. And we follow along with those stories and we cheer on those people because we see the struggle and we're like, oh, why don't they learn? Why are they making this mistake again? Or, it's like, how can they not see the truth that's right in front of them? Don't you ever get caught up like, oh, how can they be so unenlightened? So we cheer them on and we watch them change and we're so excited when they finally come to their senses or they find peace or they make that change or deal with their emotional baggage that they needed to deal with. Those are the greatest stories. The greatest stories not only have that aspect, where the characters change and transform, but the greatest stories also transform the person who's telling the story and the people who are listening or reading the story. They change us the same way that Martin Buber's grandfather was changed and transformed and healed. The greatest stories touch us at a deep place and help us to be better people and live a better life. The best stories fill us with wisdom so that we come to the end of the story and we've learned and we've grown and we've opened to something bigger than us. And perhaps we've even healed a little bit in the process. I think Sacred Journeys is a story of transformation. I think it's probably, you wouldn't be here this morning if it didn't touch you in some way, shape, or form. Whether you're here, for the first time or, only a couple times you're here because maybe it's touched someone close to you. So I want you to do me a favor and I want you to think about this for a minute because we're going to come back to this, okay? I want you to think about, to use the words from the children's time, an impression that Sacred Journeys has made on you. What indents has it carved in your soul in hopefully a good way? How have you been changed, been touched? Has it been a defining moment? And what was it? Maybe it was volunteer work, or a song, or someone in here who understood you and reached out to you. Maybe it was just a feeling you got. Think about that, and maybe some of you would be willing to share a little bit later on. 10 years ago, at our first Sacred Journeys worship service, I told the story of Moses in the burning bush. If you remember, Moses had kind of ditched out of Egypt because he had killed a man. And so he was running for his life, and he hid away, and he started a great life somewhere else, right until God came and messed it all up and said, hey, I want you to go to free all those Israelites who were in slavery in Egypt. And Moses didn't want to go. Moses tried to think of a whole lot of ways to not go, but went anyways. It seemed an appropriate story for 10 years ago. It was a story about a people who were stuck in a system of oppression and probably didn't even think there was any way ever out for them until God prompted Moses and Aaron to come around. It's a story of being set free. Story of transformation. So I didn't use the same story this time, but just a slightly further on in the story. The passage that Scott read for you this morning is part of a song that Moses and the Israelites sang after they had, you remember they got to the Red Sea with all of these hundreds of thousands of people, and Moses splits the Red Sea with his staff, right? The story goes, they walk through on dry land, and the Pharaoh's armies come in after him, and the waters close over him and wipes him out. So this passage is a song that was sung on the far side of the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, where they celebrated freedom, where they celebrated God's presence with them. I said, you led your redeemed people with your unfailing love, with your strength, you guided them to your holy pasture. Sacred Journeys was born of a confluence of issues, really. But overall, there was the same desire. A desire to be freed from the rigid confines of religion and theology. A desire to have our own home, so to speak, to be able to seek truth, to be able to ask questions, to be able to say, I don't know, but I'm learning and I'm growing, and I'm walking with people who also want to learn and grow. Sacred Journeys is a story of people who left not knowing what was going to happen or how it was going to happen, but trusting in the unfailing love and presence of the divine essence. 10 years ago, we didn't know if we'd survive or not, honestly. But survival wasn't the goal. Because that turns you into somebody completely different as soon as all you're worried about is survival as an organization. Our goal was simply to follow as faithfully as we could, as conscientiously as we could, where the Spirit led, trusting again in that unfailing love and strength. We've done a lot in 10 years. I had to compile a few of the things just to share it because they kind of blow me away. We've had probably over 500 worship services. But what's really staggering is that we have given as a community over $104,000 back into the community. For a small group of people, that's a lot of money to give back to 96 nonprofit organizations in Racine and a few outside of Racine. We've gone on 3 mission trips to Pine Ridge and the Appalachia Service Project. We were going to do another ASP trip and then, COVID. But those years that we couldn't go, we still raised money, and so we've had money in a mission account, so we ended up giving an additional $7,000 to Pine Ridge and to Pine Ridge and ASP to help their projects even when we couldn't be there. We have collected, oh my gosh, all kinds of stuff that I couldn't even keep track of. School supplies and granola bars and socks and sheets and baby items and food and presents and toys, and I'm sure I've missed a lot. Blankets. We've made blankets, and we've made glad rags as outreach projects. We've painted rooms, and we've weeded at the Eco Justice Center, and we've painted empty bowls, and we played bingo at St. Monica's, and we've decorated for the Equality Prom, and we've done other things that I'm sure you could think of that I'm not thinking of. What was it?
Helped us with our house.
Helped you with your house?
We're there.
Oh yeah, okay, so we cleaned out a few houses along the way. We have had concerts and talent auctions and cider pressing and picnics. We have advocated for LGBT folks at being at the Pride rallies, and we were at the Juneteenth Day celebration a couple of months ago. We have had social justice speakers and movies and retreats and classes. Theology on tap. We came this close to having our first asylum seeker like a week or so ago. But his wife was giving birth in Green Bay, and so thankfully they found a way to keep them together. But we're on hold right now. We're first on the docket to receive an asylum seeker to start a new adventure that way. We have welcomed babies, and we have celebrated weddings, and we have said goodbye to friends and loved ones. We have been everything I think a community can be. We've not been perfect, but we've tried really hard to hold to the mission that's been in your bulletins every Sunday for 10 years. And I don't know how many of you even look at it anymore, if you even recognize it there, so I'm going to make you read it out loud with me once, just so we remember it. All right, here we go. Sacred Journeys Spiritual Community is an inclusive, progressive Christian community that exists to honor and encourage encourage each person's spiritual journey with God. Together we will work toward wholeness through worship, learning, social justice, and mission. And I put our vision statement on the back of your calendar, which we're not going to read, but take a look, because we've tried to fulfill that too, to be a place of radical hospitality and acceptance and welcome, to be open-minded, to learn from other faith traditions, to think outside of the box, to trust in that unfailing love of God, and when we have conflict, to talk about that openly and honestly. We've tried to be all of those things. Not always doing it great, but trying. So how about you? Anybody willing to share an impression, a defining moment, something that has etched itself into your soul, impressed itself upon you? Julie? Incredible acceptance. I talked to somebody on the phone recently who used to be a member but moved away, and she said, "Kaye, I just can't find a place like Sacred Journeys." She said, every single person in that place welcomed me. I said, that's good, or I would have had to have a come to Jesus meeting with them. That's who you are. What else? What has impressed itself? An experience, a volunteer opportunity, anything. Shirley?
Just the way we come together and do amazing things, like everyone coming forward and a lot of food and donations every time.
The way people always come through. When we're led in a direction, we always seem to make it happen, no matter what it is, that everybody comes through. Anyone else? Gina?
The Women's Spirituality Group, it's got to be over 15 years that we've been together. And just the acceptance and love I have in that group, and how understanding you all are of my crazy schedule and how I pop in all the different points in my life. But just an amazing group of women.
So the Women's Spirituality Group actually started 5, 6, 7 years before Sacred Journeys, and Jean has been a part of that, and it has helped. It has been another accepting, welcoming group where we can learn and grow. Anyone else? Y'all gonna be quiet this morning, huh? Brian?
A community our size puts out so much great and meaningful music in so many different ways, and where else can you have a church service like gospel?
Right. So Brian and mentioned, for those of you on Zoom, that the music is so meaningful, and where else can you have a church that plays rock and roll? And I'm going nowhere. And you know why we do it? Because we can. And it lifts our souls and our spirits. And what else is there? What else? Anything? Diane?
In addition to the inclusivity, there's a total lack of judgment.
There's a total lack of judgment. Thank you. I hope everyone feels that way. Anything else? So maybe those are stories you can share when we have our breakfast buffet in a little bit, or just after church. Question you can ask someone else. So, what impression has Sacred Journeys had on you? Question is, where do we go from here? So let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a great Hindu sage. And he had gathered this huge crowd of people that he was teaching on a very big field. And he told a parable. He said, once there were 2 monks who had prepared for years to climb up this huge mountain to meet with Buddha at the summit. Finally, the day came, and they started their trek up the mountain. They got about halfway up, and one monk broke his leg. It was a very treacherous climb. And so they stopped there for the night, and the healthy monk helped him get as comfortable as possible. But in the morning, he was worse. He had developed a fever. And it was very clear that not only could he not go on, but he couldn't be left alone. And so the master, the sage, looked at all of these folks in the crowd and said, what would you do? Would you keep your appointment with Buddha at the summit? Or would you help the injured monk back down the mountain to get help? And one very zealous young man, young student, said, I would make him as comfortable as possible and then I would keep my appointment with Buddha. And the master was quiet for a few moments, and then he said, well, I'm glad I wouldn't be traveling with you. And then he went on to explain, he said, in every era, in every generation, this is the question. If there are more people who would leave the injured monk behind and keep their appointment, no matter how sacred, we have an age of cruelty. If more people would help the injured monk back down the mountain to get him help, we have an age of compassion. Because you see, the promised land, to use the language of the Israelites who escaped Egypt. The promised land is not necessarily at the summit of the mountain with Buddha. Sometimes we have to remember that the pinnacle, that the most meaningful, that the most deeply touching moments happen right before our eyes when we choose to help another and we meet our heart's destiny. Sometimes, we have great dreams that set us on the road to go somewhere, and then we get a ways down the road and all of a sudden we're touched by love, and we're touched by grace, and we're touched by something that says, we didn't really need to leave home at all in order to find wholeness and enlightenment because it was inside all the time. So I think this is really the sacred journey that we're all on. It's not about what I say on Sunday morning. It's not about, even though Brian likes the music, it's not about the music. It's not, no, it's really not. It's so much more than even the supposed answers we try to come up with to theological and spiritual questions. The journey is that of being caring and compassionate on the road. And that is what Joyce Rupp says, that we will find that we have been transformed and challenged and forgiven and guided and changed. That's the story we live. That's the story we find here, and I think we should continue to find here. It's the road of care and compassion that we continue to be on, so that one day we can look at each other and say, I'm glad I traveled with all of you. Amen.